Great. So once again, thank you, Alex, for taking the time to meet with me. So to
Yeah,
get started, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and your career journey.
sure. So my name is Alex Lau. I've been doing software development for, gosh, over 15 years at this point. Doing both like back-end development and front-end development, which is kind of getting into the weeds, but basically it means working on like the part of the website that people see and interact with, as well as everything that goes on behind the scenes. For example, when you're like clicking a button on a website, like all the things that happen on the back end behind the scenes for that whole interaction. And the way I got started with that is I have a computer science degree I got from University of Minnesota, and that was a while back now, almost 20 years ago. So after that, I've been working in the field in that time, and I've worked at both big companies, like a huge corporation right out of college, as well as some really small startups since moving to Austin, Texas 11 and a half years ago, and kind of everything in between. So I feel like I have a good breadth of experience, which has given me a lot of insight.
Sounds good. Sounds that's really interesting. So next up, what is a fun fact or interesting piece of information about your career?
Hmm, I think just when I first moved to Austin, even though I had been working in software development for a couple of years, I kind of was starting over from scratch in a lot of ways. It sounds kind of weird, but because on one hand, I did have experience from a couple of years, but on the other hand, I was switching different kinds of technologies that I was working with, as well as different types of companies I was working with. So I was at a really huge corporation beforehand, like I had mentioned. And then also I was going from like desktop application programming to web programming, which may seem kind of similar from the outside, but when you really dig into it and you're learning different languages and frameworks, it's not a different job entirely because there's a lot of transferable skills, but it is a different skill set, certainly.
Do you think that there's any key ways that, like, when you're adapting to new technologies, that it can make it easier? Because I know with the computer science field, things are always changing, right? So is there any
Yeah.
key?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, I mean, there's a saying that the only constant is change, kind of like what you're alluding to, right? So I think anything you can do to, at like a meta level, help yourself learn better. So like that kind of varies from person to person, but I think one thing that's worked really well for me, and I think would work for other people too, is this idea of just like getting your hands dirty and like there's like the phrase getting your reps in. So like trying to get a lot of experience and not be afraid of like failure. There's a long time in my career when I would hold off on getting feedback from coworkers. I wanted my code to be like perfect. So I would spend a lot of time up front trying to get every little bit of it kind of like tightened up and have it be pristine before I even submitted it to anybody else for like code review. And I think that that ultimately held me back because what would happen a lot of the time is I would spend all this time up front trying to get it perfect, only to submit it and be like, oh, actually, it's not perfect. There was like these other things I could have done, and not only I could have done them, but if I had known about them earlier on, then it would have saved me a lot of time and effort.
Thank you. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. So next, can you please describe any key milestones that have led to where you are today?
Hmm. One thing that was a very unexpected part of my journey was getting more involved in public speaking. For a long time, I totally shied away from that because I was terrified of public speaking. And I thought, honestly, that going into computer science and working in software development would mean that I didn't have to do public speaking, which is sort of the case. Like, I'm not doing a ton of presentations at work. I certainly have done presentations before, but that's what I think of when I think of public speaking. And long story short, I had a friend who was a former coworker of mine ask me to officiate his wedding. And so when he did that, I was too terrified to even answer. I had to think about it for a few days, but ultimately I decided that I did want to do that and I wanted to be part of this important event in his life. So I started taking public speaking classes, and what I found was that it really benefited me at work as well. I was able to communicate points a lot more clearly, give people feedback on ways that they were communicating, and just generally be a better coworker. So I think that that actually led me to an entirely different phase of my career that I wasn't intentionally going about trying to improve on, but I was really happy to kind of stumble into it. And after realizing that, I was able to lean into it more and try to get even better at my communication skills.
Yeah, that sounds really good because even in my experience, I think communication is just one of those skills that no matter where you go, it's just crucial to like have.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like there's so many industries where you're going to be interacting with other people, right? And being able to articulate your point clearly and your thought process and like just engage with coworkers are important in so many different fields.
For sure, yeah. So, next, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in your career and how did you overcome them?
Hmm. There's like two sides of it. I would say that there's like the technical side of getting up to speed on different skill sets, and we've kind of talked about that a little bit. I think the underlying lesson and challenge was again just being afraid to like in my mind to fail, but really just like another way of thinking about it would be more proactively reaching out for help and acknowledging that you're part of a team. You have a lot of smart coworkers that you're often on teams with, and it totally makes sense to, you know, lean on them and learn from them. So I think trying to do that earlier on would have made my life a lot easier. Ironically, just saying that, oh, I need help with things and being open to learning from people would be really helpful. On the other side, would be the more soft skills side, where again, just like trying to engage with others and improve my communication. And really, the question I would ask myself is like, how can I be a better teammate? Whether that means proactively providing information to people or just, you know, looking for ways to improve and asking again, kind of proactively, like, how could I improve on this thing? Or like, how could I do this better if we, if we encounter an issue, what could we do differently another time?
Thank you. That sounds very interesting. So my next question is, what role has networking played in your career, and how do you recommend building and maintaining professional relationships in the tech industry?
Hmm. Yeah, this is another one of those things where I didn't appreciate it until I had kind of gone through it myself. I mentioned I moved to Austin about 11 and a half years ago, and in that time, the different jobs that I found, it's incredible how many of them have been from either uh, knowing somebody who works at another company and having a warm introduction to that, or knowing like a friend of a friend who works at another company and getting that introduction. And the way that I came across a lot of these people and kind of like built my network was in some ways very organic. Austin is fortunate in that it has a good tech scene, so I was able to go to different meetups in person and kind of just meet people. And it didn't really feel like I was networking at the time. It just felt like I was there to attend a talk I was interested in and happened to come across other people that I was genuinely interested in talking to. And so I think in that way, I was fortunate to kind of stumble into networking in that way. But also, like, since then, I've kind of realized the importance of it. So there are times when I'll proactively reach out to other people and say, like, hey, I'm really interested in you doing this. And um, like, I think I could learn a lot from you and trying to offer something that you could give them in return. There's like so many different ways to kind of go about it. But I think in general, like the thing that's good to do is just to be really interested in something and find something that really resonates with you because you're going to want to naturally keep growing and meeting other people in that same realm if you do that.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my next question is, what are your thoughts on the current and future state of the computer science industry, and what advice would you give to young people looking to enter the field?
Yeah, I'm actually curious from your perspective what you've heard, if you've like heard anybody being like, oh, AI is coming, like we're not going to need software. Like, has anybody told you that, or is it only encouragement that you get when you tell people that you're interested in software development?
No, I've definitely heard, not really so much from professionals, but like on social media and stuff, I've like definitely seen people talk about how, with AI and everything, that it's like a dying field, or it's just not something as good as it used to be. But those things are always, I feel like, over exaggerated, because computer science has always been an industry that's been changing. And I
Yeah.
think AI is just like that new part in that, right? And it's gonna be a key part in the future. But I'd love to hear what, like, from your professional side, what you think about that.
Yeah, I feel like you've already articulated a lot of points that I was going to touch on, and you've done it very nicely. So I'll just expand on a couple of those points. One kind of parallel I see is that, and this is like dating myself a little bit, but I went into college at the time of the dot-com bubble bursting. So like I went to college and started it in 2004, and there was a lot of similar sentiments that I was hearing from people, especially around, instead of AI, it was more around outsourcing. So people were telling me, you know, tech is dying because the dot-com bubble had just burst. And even if you do land a job in software development, like it's going to be really hard because everybody's just outsourcing the work to other countries and like other people who can do it cheaper than you. And at the time, I was like kind of scared that that might be the case, but if we use some hindsight and look back like on the last 15 to 20 years, that hasn't been the case at all. There's been such a huge demand for developers. And I think that there's certainly some parallels with AI. Like you said, in its current form, it's a really good tool and it helps me a lot in my day-to-day. We'll see exactly how it evolves. It already has done a lot of things that I didn't think were ever possible. So, like, who am I to predict what it'll do in the next 5 years or so? But I do think that much like how outsourcing didn't replace developers here, because it's not purely about writing code to do your job. I think it's the same thing with AI, where you need that overall context and understanding of like how an entire system works and the trade-offs that you're making when you're working in a day-to-day situation that AI doesn't quite provide yet. And so I do just see it as another tool to help you be more effective right now. Um, to what extent it's going to do a lot of the things that I do today is really hard to say. But even if it does do those things that I do today, I'm sure there will be other newer challenges that I'll be faced with instead as a software developer going forward. So it's a very long-winded answer, but I still do see it as being a very useful pursuit that's going to be in high demand going forward.
Yeah, I agree. That's how I kind of see it as well. And I think the key thing for like new developers is like to learning the ins and outs of the technology and to know everything about it. And I think that's
Right.
going to be really useful for them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's like other industries and trends where it's kind of been uh not quite parallels, but like different evolutions that have come out of it. Like, it wasn't until other social media that we even had this idea of content creators and like jobs that have flourished because that technology existed. I think we're gonna have the same thing with AI. It's like different jobs that uh, come about because the new technology is there. Like nobody was talking about being like a prompt engineer 5 years ago, but that's a thing now, right? And like there's going to be other opportunities that even if they're not software development directly, they're certainly going to be at least tangential, if not, directly related to software development.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. So my next question is, what are some key skills or qualities you believe are essential to success in the tech field?
I kind of talked before about how learning is really the biggest thing, like being able to be adaptable, work well with others, kind of be able to pick up new skills and uh, take what you have learned and apply it to other domains. So, like once you've learned one programming language, it's a lot easier to learn other ones, right? But it's really a matter of getting proficient in that first couple and like getting your feet wet on a team and kind of going through that entire software development process of like testing, like ideation of a feature itself, following up with it, being analytical about measuring different features as they get released, like really just being open to kind of like learning at a high level. And uh, if you can keep growing, like I don't think I've ever met any developer who has been unsuccessful when they've like truly mastered that trait.
Yeah, I agree. Were there any specific resources that you used to help you out, or was it just like on the job as you kind of adapted and went along?
I think it's hard to point to like a specific site. I mean, there's like Stack Overflow, which will help you with very specific bugs, right? Or like different
Mhm.
tutorials. Like I've used Udemy to learn certain skill sets on my own, but I don't think that there's a silver bullet in that regard. Probably at like a from like a practice, like a team's best practice standpoint, there's the idea of code review, having other people look at your code and getting feedback on it. I think that's probably the one thing that I've done that's been really, really useful is like being open to hearing feedback from others as I've like gone to submit code and heard either the problems I find with it or things they would have done differently. That's been what's helped me grow the most personally.
That's great to hear. So kind of transitioning now over, you are also a best-selling author for your book, Keep Calm and Code On. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you kind of got inspired to write the book?
Sure, yeah. And are you interested in the book process in general, or do you want me to start with just like how I first started to write it?
It's up to you. You can kind of start with the idea and how, like what it's all about.
Sure. Yeah. And so I originally started like the origin of the book was that I was going to do a blog series and I was trying to just collect a lot of different ideas for that blog. I wanted to have a lot of them because I'd started trying to do other blogs in the past before and they didn't work out, mostly because I would be really excited about them for a few weeks and then I would kind of just lose momentum after that. And so this time it was a little bit different because I had so many different ideas that I was trying to gather ahead of time. What I noticed is that a lot of them fell into the same kind of cohesive theme of being about mistakes that I've made in my career. And so after I realized that there were so many different ideas that kind of like fell in the same theme, I decided to start writing about those. And I felt like it would be for material for a book itself because it was something that I knew that I really would have benefited from had I known about them earlier in my career. And I felt like the lessons that I had learned were ones that other developers would benefit from too, especially if they were earlier on in their career. Because we've kind of talked about this, how like experience is the best teacher and being able to learn from your mistakes is really valuable. And I think that there's like this middle ground to be struck between like going through something yourself and having it be really painful and having somebody warn you ahead of time, or it's like if you're aware of a problem, it really helps you kind of like overcome it because you know generally what things to kind of look out for. So again, my book is all about like different mistakes that I've made and what I would have done differently to avoid them going forward.
Great, thank you so much. So we may have talked about this before, but were there any like specific or like very big pitfalls do you think that is common for a lot of developers to fall into?
I think one of them that comes to mind for me is that's like very prevalent among the entire industry is a chapter that I have called the hardcore mentality pitfall, where I experienced this, especially when I was working at a startup, and I kind of was susceptible to like the Hollywood trope of a developer, where it's like, oh, the only way I can be a good developer is by just grinding as much code as possible and like coding for 12, 13 hours nonstop. And uh, I really had to learn it the hard way of going through that and trying to emulate that for a long period of time because obviously what I found was that I had burned myself out. And even though I was writing a lot of code, it wasn't good code. And I really grew to appreciate the value of work-life balance and um, actually considering it instead of being like a weakness, it was actually a strength. Like having a good schedule and just being really consistent and being really purposeful with the time that I was writing code, I ended up delivering way better code than if I was just trying to like work the entire day nonstop and be like really hardcore about different problems. So I think that that's one that not only applies really lots of different jobs, especially ones that you have like you need like a high level of cognition. You need to be thinking a lot about different jobs. Like the example I give in my book is that ever want like a a lawyer that's super hardcore that was like up all night, to be defending me in a case. Or I'd never want like a doctor that was super hardcore that did 5 surgeries in a row for the last 20 hours to be operating on me again, going forward. So why would it be any different from software? Like the best code that I write, it comes from being well balanced in my life as well, being well rested, working an appropriate number of hours. And uh, it's especially obvious when you kind of like magnify that over a longer period of time. Like it's easy to have like little short spurts being really hardcore, but it's so hard to do it on a longer time frame.
Yeah, I totally agree because even in my experience, there are definitely times where I overburden myself with my work, and it's
Yeah.
just best to kind of take a step back and then go at the problem later on when you're a bit more focused and that's really when you get that moment where you find a solution to something that you may
Yeah.
have been working on for a long time.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how you can like take a break and then you come back to a problem and then you have the solution, not like when you're sitting there thinking about it all the time, right?
Yeah, definitely interesting. So my next question is, from your book, what do you hope readers to take away? And like, what's the biggest thing that you want them to kind of take away from the book, essentially?
I think I mean, each of the lessons is pretty specific, and I tried to make it like kind of clear cut in terms of like what to do or what not to do and how to avoid those things. Like I talk about things like don't ship your code changes in one giant change, kind of like how I was talking about earlier. But if I had like one aspiration for readers themselves, it would be to acknowledge their own mistakes and learn from those because I know for me personally, there was always kind of a sense of pride and ego that got in the way from admitting my mistakes. But if you think about it, those are often really the times that you have like the biggest lessons to learn. So if you can get over that ego and kind of like instead embrace the mistakes for what they are, that's when you learn the most.
Thank you. I agree. So next, we kind of talked about this, but other than maybe AI and machine learning, are there any other emerging technologies that you're seeing currently in your career or have seen previously?
Hmm. Do you mean specific frameworks or kind of like AI and machine learning? Those are more of like trends, right? So like there's things like crypto as well or serverless development. I feel like there's all kinds of different things, right? Are you wondering about one that I'm excited about personally, or I think is really useful, or just my take on how there are different?
Just your general take, but yeah, if you have any specific personal experiences or
Sure.
personal ones you're looking for, please share that as well.
I think I guess I'll take a step back and kind of answer the question from like a higher level in terms of my experience. Like one thing that I've noticed is that people tend to view a lot of these emerging solutions as being like a silver bullet. Like this new thing is going to solve everything, right? We saw it with crypto, whereas like crypto is going to take over the entire world, or like serverless is going to be the only pattern to emerge going forward, things like that. And I think it's really easy to get excited about new things that come out. And I don't actually think it's bad to get excited about them either. Like I love hearing about new technologies and frameworks and things like that. And same thing with AI. Like I think it's great that there's so much hype and buzz around it. I think the danger is to get overcommitted in it and say like, oh, this is going to be the only thing we're going to need going forward because what experiences show me is that that's like never the case. But instead, I think that's fine to kind of celebrate each of these different technologies and ways of approaching problems for the strengths that they do kind of exhibit. Like in the same way that I wouldn't want there to be one like spoken language in the world. Like I like that there's a diversity of languages. Like I don't think there should be one single programming language or pattern in programming that kind of wins out because the reality of it is that you're always kind of balancing trade-offs, but also trying to match like a given problem to a solution that has like the strengths aligned with a problem. So I think that's like part of the fun of working on these things in technology is like finding that match and not necessarily looking for kind of like one solution to rule them all, but instead, like I said, celebrating how solutions are different and you want to find the best one at any given moment.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Um, so my next question kind of goes back to like early on in your career when you're kind of looking for jobs. So do you have
Yeah.
any tips for like developers who are like actively seeking out employment in the computer science and tech field?
Yeah. I think it's really important to acknowledge that it was so much different of a landscape than it is now. I think it is very competitive now, more competitive than when I was first applying. And so people have to be more strategic and thoughtful about how they approach looking for jobs. But there is one thing that you remember how I was talking about how people from uh, getting a computer science degree in college. I do remember talking to one of my professors, and his what he said really resonated with me. He said that there's always room for good people in the industry, like regardless of what the climate is like. And I think we're still seeing that now. But it is tough because you want to stand out and it takes hard work to do that sometimes. And again, I feel bad that the landscape is different than when I first joined because I don't want it to be such a high bar that people get discouraged because I think it's a really interesting field and I want there to be more people in the field. So I think that um, one thing that I did was I had a kind of like a passion project that I could share with other people in my interviews. Specifically, it was like in the college campus I was on at the time, they didn't have any way to kind of like schedule your classes and like find conflicts within it. So I made this program that would like scrape the data off the college campus website. And like you could say, I'm interested in taking these four classes. They're all, at different times, but like which times could I opt in and select? And my program was frankly terrible. Like the code was so bad in it, but it was working, it was effective, and most importantly, it gave me something to point at and talk about when I was in interviews. And I think that that's still the case today is like if you're able to exhibit any experience you have, um, particularly with like working on teams and working with others and building something. That's like the best example that you could have and would really give anybody an advantage when it comes to interviewing. Now, I know that might be harder for some than others, like depending on if you're in a boot camp or you're just trying to learn solo, but opportunities do exist out there. You just have to go and find them. And it might be tough, but that is like one thing that I would really recommend. And, once you get your foot in the door, it becomes a lot easier because you naturally have that same kind of context kind of built into your daily schedule. So you can point to other examples going forward in other interviews.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful, and I completely agree with everything.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Uh, so kind of to end off, what would you say is the most important characteristic or skill aspiring developers should understand to be successful?
I've talked a lot about being willing to learn and embracing failure. I think those are honestly the top two. Within computer science, one that we haven't talked about as much is just the idea of building. Like the one thing that's really rewarding about working in software development is that at its core, it is this idea of problem solving and like trying out different solutions and like seeing which ones work, seeing which ones are most efficient, and trying to again pair the right solution with the problem at hand. So I think there's different proxies to gauge if you like problem solving or not. There's like video games or things like that. But I think that if that's something, idea of like having a problem and then being really satisfied with solving it is something that appeals to you or to anybody who's listening to this, like that could be a really good indicator that software development could be something that you enjoy.
Thank you. I agree. That's definitely where I got my passion from. It was really from that problem solving aspect and co coming up with these solutions to different problems. That was definitely what like attracted me into the field and continues to kind of be my key passion for the industry.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear that.
So is there anything else you'd like to say or have anything else you'd like to add?
Um, Again, I would just express that like I've been doing this for a while and I really enjoy it as a profession. And I know like I said, the landscape and the climate right now is tougher for people who are trying to enter the field. But I do feel like if it's something that you're passionate about, like I would highly encourage you to just keep at it and be consistent. And I'm not sure if you're planning on posting links for this video or not, but I'm happy to provide, the my book's website or even just like my LinkedIn page. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to try to help you out as well.
Thank you so much. Once again, thank you so much, Alex, for taking the time to have to meet with me. I'm very confident that this is going to be useful to a lot of aspiring developers and individuals and students overall, and they're going to find this very useful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And with that, have a great rest of your day. And I look forward to possibly connecting in the future as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. Please feel free to reach out anytime.